Welcome to the Grimfrost Podcast. Today's guest is Matthias Toplak, archaeologist, reenactor, and head of the Haithabu Viking Museum. So, welcome to Sweden. So, how do you like it so far? How's it been?
It's great here.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be here, I must say. And it's impressing what you've got. And the weather is quite good as well.
The weather is amazing right now in Sweden. It's not normally this hot, actually. This is like maybe a week, a year or something. Then it rains and it's cold and windy and crap. So you come at a perfect time if you want to experience Swedish summer, definitely. So do you have any plans? What are your plans when you're here in Sweden?
We already enjoyed the summer, spending some time at the sea.
Yeah.
Just nice vacation with the family, enjoying the summer. I'm coming from the northernmost part of Germany, so close to the Danish border, so we're used to bad weather. So we're used to enjoy the one day of summer.
I see. But do you have any plans to visit any historical sites while you're here? I mean, there are quite a few Viking-related sites in Sweden, for sure.
Yeah, I saw some on the way, but today it's just a family holiday, and I promised nothing with archaeology. Which is very hard for me, I must admit. But just family time.
So your family's not as interested as you are then?
My father-in-law and my mother-in-law both were archaeologists.
Oh, okay.
So my wife is quite used to all this boring old stuff.
Oh, I see. So she had her fill growing up,
Yes,
probably.
absolutely.
Okay. So no rune stones or anything?
If there's something popping up, we will take a stop here.
Well, there's a really cool one in Kristinehamn, just about, I don't know, 30 minutes from here by car, which is has the Elder Futhark inscription on it. So just a recommendation.
Yeah, we found one, I guess the only Swedish stave church still standing on the way up. And this was the point where I had to stop. And I'm sorry, girls, I have to take a picture.
That's a valid reason, I would say. So how did your interest in Vikings start in the first place? I mean, as you said, you grew up in Germany. Obviously, the Vikings were all around the Baltic area, but I think most people don't realize that the northern Germany and Poland and that area, Vikings were there as well. So, but where did your interest come from?
That's quite a good question. And I can't really answer it. We had quite a lot of books about the Vikings, so children's books about the Vikings at home. And I was very fascinated by this culture. But at the same time, as you said, even if the Vikings were popular in Germany for the last decades or so, you do not learn anything about them at school. In northern Germany, you have to visit the Haithabu Museum as pupil, of course, and you get some dates, but that's it. So I was really interested to get deeper into this Viking stuff. And I read all the books I could get my hands on. And my mother is a bookseller. So these were quite a lot of books. And I read almost everything from all these, let's say, popular introductions to the Viking Age, all these novels, Röde Orm, of course. But there are also some interesting older German novels and, of course, Old Norse Saga literature, all these German translations, and the Edda, of course.
Yeah.
And suddenly there was this fantastic world that pops up in my mind, and it changed my life entirely. It set everything upside down. And I said, well, hell yeah, that's cool. I want to be an archaeologist. I want to study archaeology. Already at the age of, let's say, 14 and 15. For the disappointment of my parents, because I guess they had some other plans for me. But anyway, here I am.
But they must be proud of you now, though, right?
Yeah,
sure. a doctorate and everything.
Yeah, sure. I have my own museum, so it turns out fine.
All right. So I'm just happy you didn't say Viking. Because when you come to Germany and you talk about Vikings, that's like the first thing that people think of is that cartoon of the little Viking who's, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Do this all the time.
Yeah. So you became an archaeologist, as you said, and now you're also the head of the Haithabu Museum, which you visited as a kid. That must feel amazing, right?
Yeah, it's like a dream. And I still wait up to be woken up to realize, okay, that was just a dream. and you're still some ordinary student.
Yeah. But so you've done all these stuff but let's jump into another thing that I know that you're really much into, and that's the reenacting, because you're a very keen reenactor. So when did that become a part of your life? Was that before you became an archaeologist, or?
I think it was almost the same time when I finished school and I started studying archaeology. I also got engaged in all these reenactment groups, and this was a interesting new dimension for me, because studying archaeology in Germany means you're just studying. So you're learning all this theoretical stuff, and you're almost not allowed to do any practical things. It's still something for all these stupid craftsmen which don't have any clues about anything, at least according to all these professors, or many professors in Germany. So it was something totally new to try out all this stuff you're reading about and you're learning about.
So was that the main reason why you sought that part of reenacting out, just to actually physically learn all the stuff that you've been reading about, and maybe even as a, what do you say, visiting your imagination of how things would be, or testing how things would be?
Both. Of course, there's this academical interest.
Yeah.
Hey, let's try out how this is working. But also, you can dive into the Viking Age. You can experience things. And you can kind of feel like a Viking, or at least you can imagine you feel like a Viking sitting in Haithabu next to the campfire, or in Moscow, or you're on the battleground in Volyn, or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is also very fascinating, because you can somehow try to live in the Viking Age.
Because the Viking reenactment scene has really become, from my point of view, anyways, it's become quite big actually in the last couple of years. So how would you say that it has changed since you started out? Because you've been doing this for quite some time then.
I started more than 20 years ago.
Yeah,
and I think the scene evolved, and especially with regards to the academic approach. So there are quite a lot of people from the reenactment scene who know our books better than we did, who know all this source material that can count down all the findings from one special Birka grave or so on. So they have read quite a lot, and they really dug their way into archaeology, into academia. And that's a very good approach, I guess.
Yeah, because when you meet people who are into this, you can really tell that they are very serious about getting things right, correct. But one thing that fascinates me as well is that they still want to have fun. It's not just getting nerdy about stuff. Would you agree with that?
I think there are some people who are just nerdy. Yeah, but
maybe I met the right people.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, but most of the scene is just about living this Viking thing, getting closer to the original finds based on academic work, which is great. But on the other hand, they're doing this stuff to just have fun, to experience the Viking Age.
Yeah. So, what would you say is for you is the most fun about reenacting?
I guess this is society coming together with old friends, for decades, and which you might met once a year at some festival, gathering together around the campfire, having a beer, having a chat, and also getting rid of all this modern digital stuff. Just let your smartphone in your chest or in your camp and just enjoy the moment. That's for me the most important part of all this Viking reenactment stuff.
Yeah. So you mentioned Volyn, and obviously there's this big gathering there where they have the big battle every year. Do you also partake in that?
Yes, I did.
You do?
Not any longer, but I went there a couple of times.
Yeah. So what was your weapon of choice, or what is your weapon of choice?
Actually, it's a saber.
That's a saber?
Yeah. I started with some, of course, Birka kit, as I guess everyone did some 10 years ago. And I developed into this Eastern Oriental stuff with saber and nomad riding gear and so on. And I somehow stick to the saber.
That's interesting, because sabers are like, when you think about Vikings, sabers is not the first thing that pops into your head. And I know that I learned quite a few years ago that actually some Vikings used them, especially people who traveled to to Miklagård and modern day Istanbul, they would bring those types of weapons home. Is that correct? I think it is.
I'm not sure if it's Miklagård, but it's this connection to all these Eastern European nomadic tribes, which use weapon, sabers.
Yeah, so that's kind of fascinating. So going into like the Haithabu Viking Museum, can you tell us about Haithabu? Can you tell us what it is? Like you can just fill out the whole void here. Now, just tell us about the Haithabu Museum, because it's a fascinating place.
Yeah, of course, it's the best place to visit the Viking Age. I must say that. In the Viking Age, Haithabu was the largest and I guess the most important trading town, or emporium, as we say, the gate to the north. So everything that somehow happened between the Scandinavians and the Central European moderate Christians happened in Haithabu. And this makes this place so highly interesting. It's not only a Viking Age trading center with a bunch of Danes sitting there, but it's some kind of early European, early medieval melting pot with different cultures coming together, trading, evolving to perhaps some new kinds of identity. So you have some proto-urban identity, as today you would not say I'm Swede, but I'm Stockholmer. And I guess there was many people that just say I'm not Dane, I'm from Haithabu, for example. So this makes this place highly interesting. We have a normal exhibition, so the museum just showing finds. And the special thing is that we have 7 reconstructed houses in the center of the original settlement. So you can come into Haithabu, into the original Haithabu, and expire the Viking Age on this original spot.
So it's actually recreated on top of the archaeological finds.
Exactly, and it's recreated according to these archaeological features exactly at the spot. So you can come into the 10th century or 9th century Haithabu.
Yeah, because I've never been there myself, and
you have to.
Everybody says like you have to go, like, but you kind of have to find the time as well. But I really want to go. So, but as you said in the past, it was like the gateway to Scandinavia, basically, for any people who wanted to trade with Scandinavia, at least from like what we call the Western Trail, I guess. But this melting pot must have been it must have brought a bunch of like new ideas into into Scandinavia as well. Like I think I read somewhere that the people in Haithabu, there was this they used coal for their as eyeliners and stuff. Is that correct, or was that a common practice?
That's this one bloody source
It's
written
one
by
source?
an Arabic diplomat or someone who visited Haithabu actually in the 10th century, which is amazing because we have this guy coming from Southern Europe, visiting all these medieval cities in Europe, and he's coming to Haithabu and he's writing about it. And this shows how important this town, this emporium must have felt for him. Mm-hmm. But he writes quite a lot of interesting stuff. So he writes that Haithabu is a large city at the outermost part of the world. Sounds great. And then he continues that the inhabitants are very primitive. They're just eating fish. And they throw their children into the sea. And they use this eyeliner, whatever. Might be that he, as an Arabic Muslim guy, wasn't used to alcohol drinking. So I'm not sure. And my favorite passage is that he writes that the singing of these people in Haithabu is as ugly as the barking of dogs. And we have all these metal festivals around, Wacken and Baltic Open Air, and perhaps it's some predecessor.
Yeah, because that's another thing I think is correct, because that's what they talk about, like the throat singing, that the Vikings would sing like that. Is that the source for that? Do you think, or
I'm not sure. I would rather think that he's using some literary some topoi.
Oh, okay.
Simply to show that all these people in the north are rather primitive.
Oh, I see. But so you don't think it was like a common thing in the Viking Age to wear makeup and stuff? Because you know that Vikings, in a way, they were very vain. They wanted to wear like big golden chains and show off their wealth, and if they could afford it, they wanted to wear nice garments and stuff. So do you think there could be anything to that, though?
It's the same question with tattooing.
Yeah.
So it would fit to our modern perception of the Vikings, but we do not have any other evidence than just these two very small quotes about the Viking Age, where we are very unsure how to interpret them.
Yeah. But so let's go into something that we kind of know a little bit about anyways, because talking about appearances, you've studied and written about Viking Age body modification. And I think that's kind of interesting because there's one thing in particular that I think is quite commonly known is that they file their teeth. So could you describe the appearance, like how that would look like? Is it possible to describe it?
It's difficult because now you're smiling at me, I can see your front teeth.
Yeah.
But if I'm not smiling, I might have a large mustache or something.
Yeah.
You're not seeing my teeth. So I'm very convinced that this is nothing to show to the outside world, but it's something that is very some hidden feature which you can show to someone if you would like to, but not if the other people you're speaking with should not see it.
So, but how was it made then? Like,
I guess with an iron file.
Yeah, and it would be just like a stripe or something.
Yeah, you're flattening the teeth.
Yeah,
and then you're using this iron file to make 1 or 2 or several grooves into the front teeth.
Okay. So I think I heard something that they might have colored them as well, but how would that work?
That's a good question. We do not have any evidence for this, for sure.
Okay.
But it might be that they are using some soot or something to make them black.
Yeah. So, but who would do this then? Like, who would say, well, I'm going to be a part of this group and I want to file my teeth, because that sounds very painful to me.
It's very interesting that many of these people, especially those from Gotland, they had this teeth filing performed by a person who really knew what to do. So I guess there was just a couple of people who were able to perform this procedure. Okay. So it's a very close group, I guess, of people who could get this kind of body modification.
So if you're a person who wants to belong to this group, how, like is there any written material about this, or just archaeological?
No.
So we don't know.
Yeah. So we have several theories about these tooth filings, and I put forward one, but it's just a theory.
But what is your theory then about the tooth filings? Can you explain it?
I guess it's connected to some early trading organizations, similar to later medieval guilds. So you have a group of traders who can identify themselves by this tooth filing. So if you're going to another marketplace, you can show that you're belonging to a certain group, and then you get some privileges, or you're in a safe harbor or whatever. So you get some advantages of belonging to this certain group. Okay.
But are there any like findings or things that kind of contradicts that theory, that says that it might be something else? Or
of course, we have these 2 other theories, and one is that this is a marking of slaves, which is, I think, not that convincing, because many of them were buried very elaborate. We have some in chamber graves, especially in Birka. There are 2 guys in chamber graves. We have very few of them with weapons, but many of them with their dress accessories, with knives, with keys. And this is nothing I would expect on a slave burial.
No.
And we have the second interpretation that this might be some warrior Eli's. So they are the Vikings' grim grin, showing their their primitive, aggressive behavior with these tooth filings, which might, of course, be a possibility. But we are lacking graves with weapons. So there were just a couple of them, I think 9 or 10 of these individuals buried with weapons.
So was it both men or women, or like men exclusively?
Only men.
Okay. Because I think I heard that there's one particular grave that was kind of weird, where the person who was buried had their foot cut off and their head cut off, and was buried face down. Do you know anything about that, or do I have my facts wrong here?
No, your facts are absolutely right.
Yeah.
This is a burial from Bolsternäs in Uppland, and it's, I guess, one of the earliest graves of a guy with tooth filings. And the ordinary burial is the cremation burial of some, I guess, rich man or whatever. And he had two decapitated men being buried together with him in a prone position, so lying on the belly. And one of these decapitated men had also teeth filings. And this is pain in the ass, because it does not fit with our theory. Yeah.
Well, we can't really travel back in time to find out why, but I guess. But moving ahead then, speaking of heads, elongated heads was one thing when I was looking up this stuff. Elongated heads, that must be the weirdest kind of thing ever. I mean, filing teeth, you kind of understand it, but can you take us through the process? Like, how do you make an elongated head in the first place?
As the father of a baby, I can imagine, because the head is very soft. The bones of the head are very soft in the first 2 or 3 years. So you can bind the head so that it gets to an elongated shape, which is not even painful.
Oh,
I heard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can understand that. But so you found these graves, I guess, only on Gotland. Then.
Yeah.
But that's exclusively women, right?
Yeah.
So what's the thought behind that? You know, what are your theories here?
It's spectacular and fascinating and a problem, because we do not really understand it. We know that this custom of skull deformation appears in the 9th and 10th century in southeastern Europe, Bulgaria, for example, so around the Black Sea, and in Central Asia. So there might be some connections, because they do not believe that some people on Gotland in the late Viking Age suddenly invented this body modification. But I guess that these people had some connections to southeastern Europe. And I was really convinced that these are 3 females from, for example, Bulgaria, that married some Gotlandic merchants and came to Gotland and died there and had been buried on Gotland. And I wrote a very large thesis with almost 500 pages about this one of these cemeteries. And I guess 1 week before publication, I got a DNA analysis of one of these female, and they said, "I'm sorry, it's this female is coming from Gotland." So it entirely destroyed my complete theory, and I had to rethink and rewrite everything. But it might be that we have some Gotlandic merchants that traveled to the southeastern Baltic, southeastern Europe. We have trading connections to these regions. And that some of these Gotlandic merchants had their small children getting their head deformed there for any reasons.
So are all 3 women from the burials actually from Gotland then?
One of them is from Gotland. One of them is from the Eastern Baltic, so Lithuania might be, and the other one is unknown, because the bones were not tested in this study. Okay. But it's of course always very difficult to say, according to ADNA, someone is coming from exactly Gotland. It's the Baltic at least, so it's not southeastern Europe.
Exactly. Yeah. So are there any other like body modifications that are like were common during the Viking Age? We always talked about tattoo artists, but we don't really know a lot about it, I guess, because not a lot of skin remains.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, but so are there any other body modifications that Vikings would be up to? I don't know. Like, what do we know about that stuff? Because it's kind of interesting.
Not as much as we would like to.
Yeah.
So there are no other permanent body modifications, at least we know about. So there might be, of course, some kind of scarifications or piercings. They might have been common, but we can't trace it in the archaeological material because, as you said, flesh is vanished, skin is vanished, so it's just the bones. And we can only trace permanent body modifications on the bones, which means elongated heads or even the filed teeth.
Yeah. All right. So you studied a bunch of stuff. This is just like a small little detail, but one thing that I thought was kind of interesting that you've been really digging deep into, as far as I understand anyways, is like ritual killings and human sacrifice. And this is a big thing when you talk to people about Vikings, that they made human sacrifices. They would hang people and to sacrifice them to Odin and all that stuff. So how common were human sacrifices or ritual killings in the Viking Age, would you say?
Human sacrifices, I guess, are not very common. They belong to the highest social strata. When we look, for example, at ship burials such as Gokstad or Oseberg, we do not have any evidence for people being killed in these two graves, but this is something I would expect, human sacrifice. Ritual killings are quite common, I would say, because this also involves animals. And we have lots of graves with dogs or especially horses being killed during the funeral ceremony, and this is a bloody mess. And I guess it was meant to be a bloody mess, to spill blood, to fulfill violence during the funeral ceremony.
So that, I mean, how do we know what a Viking burial would look like, or like a funeral? Like, are there any like descriptions of them?
We have one wonderful description written by this Arab diplomat, Ibn Fadlan, who traveled east and who met, let's say, Vikings in the broadest sense, so people probably coming from Eastern Scandinavia. And they're performing the funeral ceremony for one of their chieftains. And this is just an amazing story, because we have an eyewitness looking upon a funeral ceremony, and he does not understand everything he sees, but he describes it. And it's just amazing. And he's writing about something which happens in the darkness and which is full of blood and gore, and it's a bloody mess, and it's absolutely fascinating.
So, do we even know why like sacrifices were like a common practice? Like what? I mean, if we assume that somebody dies and they're going to Valhalla, you can understand that. All right, in the afterlife, you're going to be sitting at like the banquet of Odin, and you're going to, in the morning, you're going to go out and fight on the with the Einherjar, and then you come back and to the hall and feast. So you're going to need your weapons, but like, are you going to need a slave or a dog or?
Why not?
Yeah. So do we know why this would be like an important part of a burial, and to have these sacrifices for like important people?
We have different theories, and they might be intermingled. So I think it's not one idea behind this, but a collection of several ones. On the one hand, of course, you're going to the afterlife, and you might need someone who's looking after your weapons, for example, a slave or a slave girl for whatever. But on the other hand, a burial is also something that happens in public. So everyone from the society sees. And just killing a slave shows that you're rich enough to afford this. So it's something like a showing off, killing this wealth. This is one aspect, together with this idea of you need someone for the afterlife. But also this idea of just killing something, which is something that was described as ritual scapegoating. So you are in the middle of the society, and now you're allowed to kill someone just to remain peace after this funeral ceremony.
Oh, wow. So that's why. But like, who would do this, and like, where in the social status would you be to be able to, or to do this? I mean, obviously not a common farmer would do it, but like, would any citizen of Birka or Haithabu do that, or?
No, I don't think so. When you're looking at the burials at Birka and Haithabu, most of them are just as normal as modern burials would be. You have the deceased being buried in a coffin, or maybe in a shroud or whatever, without any grave goods or perhaps some dress accessories. So it's something which belongs to the higher social stratus.
Yeah.
But perhaps as a rich farmer, you get your dog or perhaps even your horse with you. This might be possible. We have a lot of burials with a dog or a horse, which belongs to the, not even to the elite, but to the richer people in society.
Because I'm thinking, like, as I said, like, we often think about Vikings wanting to go to Valhalla, but obviously most people in Scandinavia would not die on the battlefield. They would die of sickness or like old age, or any number of reasons, really. So let's say like a very rich farmer dies and he brings all this stuff. Like where does he imagine himself going with this stuff? Or is it just, as you say, like a show off? Or does it have? Do we know if it has any religious, like any religious meaning or?
I'm always very skeptical with all this religious stuff because almost all sources about the mythology of the Vikings were written down later on.
Yeah.
We know, of course, that Valhalla, this idea of Valhalla, existed already in the Viking Age. But was this of interest for some farmer? I don't know. And it's not him who's performing the burial, but his relatives. So it's, in my opinion, always a social political aspect. What are you allowed to do in this burial? What does society expect you to do, like today? And perhaps even some ideas of the afterlife. But even this idea of Valhalla or of going anywhere is nothing that is common to all burials. If you're buried in a ship, this might be the idea that you're sailing to Valhalla or to the afterlife, at least. But if you're buried in a chamber burial, you're supposed to stay there. And we have, I think it's the Gisla saga, I'm not quite sure, one Old Norse saga literature, where they tell that they are hearing the deceased man sitting in his grave mound and singing by night.
Oh,
so he's actually staying there for the rest of his life. And if you're looking at the famous Oseberg burial, these two females were supposed to stay in this bloody ship because it's anchored. So they should stay in this grave mound.
Yeah, because I think that's an interesting part, which I think most people, me especially, I didn't really think too much about that until but where you imagine that actually these anchored or grave mounds where you put they are actually markers, that they might be markers for a territorial, like that we belong here because here's our ancestor and he's still here. So would you say that interpretation, like what do you feel about that? Because I just quite recently read it and I thought it was a very interesting idea, especially when you look at places like Birka where people live actually in a community, but they still have lots of grave mounds, and even people who not necessarily live in Birka were buried there. So a grave mound would be like all right, this is our place. We belong here. We own this.
Yeah.
So how does that theory ring? How does that theory ring with you?
It's totally convincing. Erecting a grave mound is also a sign of power. Hey guys, I can afford this building, this monument. And it's also, in my opinion, a visible sign of we're belonging here. So our ancestors are part of this soil. And there's a very interesting cemetery on Gotland, Havur, I Havlinbusokken, where we have a large number of Viking Age burials that were, where the deceased were buried in highly older graves from the early Iron Age. So this is something, nothing else than just showing, okay, guys, our ancestors are living here for centuries, so this is our land. It's a claim for power, nothing else.
Yeah. So going back to the sacrifices, then, like how would they be performed? Like, do we know that, or is that Ibn Fadlan? Obviously, that's one description, but do we know, like from archaeological finds, like how the sacrifice or the burial sacrifices would be performed?
We have several of these sacrifices, so slave sacrifices, as we would call them in the first place, where the individuals were decapitated, which is quite obvious. Okay, they are killed, they're dead. But what I find very interesting about this passage in Ibn Fadlan, the way he describes how this slave girl is killed. It's strangled and it's stabbed by a dagger. And
sorry, it's death by?
It's stabbed with a dagger or a knife.
Sorry, yeah, I didn't hear you.
Yeah. So this is something you would not see in the archaeological record. It's something which is not necessarily visible in the archaeological record. So there might be actually a lot of all these double burials where we have a male and a female, where we might interpret them as being man and woman, where this female might have been killed, at least according to this source of Ibn Fadlan.
Yeah. That's actually kind of fascinating and horrifying at the same time.
I guess most of them are just relatives or people died together or died during winter times, and you have to wait for the soil to be for the frost and the snow to go away so that you can bury them. But there might be the chance that there is one or two, or at least some of these ritual sacrifices.
Yeah. So, was this a practice that was common during the entire Viking Age, or is it a specific time period? I mean, obviously, maybe not the later where Christianity comes in, but like, what would you say? Was it common practice in the whole during the whole Viking Age?
It ends with the later Viking Age, so when Christianity is coming to the north. But even Fotland writes in the 920s, so it's not in the earliest Viking phase. I guess it's something that is really connected and embedded in this Viking Age culture and in these ideas of a society which is very dominated by violence.
Yeah. So it's interesting with the sacrifices, though, because there's one thing I wanted to bring up, and it's this mythological sacrifice that I think is mentioned in one text, and I even wrote a song about it myself in my band, and it's the blood eagle, because that's a really gruesome way of going. But are there any archaeological findings to support the existence of that?
No, unfortunately not. It would be fun to excavate the victim of a blood eagle once, but there is nothing as far as I know. And there's the problem with this interpretation of this passage. Is he getting an eagle painted on his back? Or is he sacrificed to the eagles? Is he, Is he given to the eagles? Which is a phrase, you know this, which is common to the Viking Age, that someone is supposed to die.
Yeah.
So is he supposed to die, or is he actually getting this blood eagle on his back?
Yeah. Because from what I understand, like the way I interpret that passage is that they carved an eagle on his back with a knife. So basically just cutting him on the skin, but not necessarily breaking the ribs and pulling out his lungs. So yeah, I see where you're coming from, because I think what they say in the sagas is you feed the eagle. Yeah. That's when you even on the battlefield, the people you kill, you feed the eagle. So I hear you, but it's a really graphic way. Like, I don't know why that became such a big symbol of Viking sacrifice, but
because it's just, I think, the essence of Viking cruelty in a nutshell.
Yeah.
One thing, there was a very interesting article published, I think 1 or 2 years ago, from a medical perspective, and they showed that it's actually possible to perform this blood eagle. So this works.
Wow! Like, how do they know? I hope they didn't try it on someone.
Perhaps on some corpse. So yeah. I'm not sure, but it's a very interesting study, at least.
That sounds terrible. So we talked about burials. We talked about these bloody, gory, ceremonies when burying people. We talked about these insanely brutal, maybe fictional sacrifice and stuff. So let's talk about something else you studied, which this is a perfect step after talking about that, because I think I read somewhere that you reevaluated the roles of domestic cats.
Yes, I did.
See, my wife is going to love this because she loves cats. We have four adopted cats, and they're awesome. So what can you tell us about that? Like, well, let's start. You reevaluated this. So what was the theory before you started digging into this about the domestic cats? What was the thought about them in the Viking Age before you started getting into it?
I think there was not as much. There was a Swedish master thesis, or bachelor thesis, I don't know, many years ago. And it was just fun because I love cats as well. We have 2 at home. and I was asked to participate in a volume about animals in prehistory in archaeology. And I said, well, let's just do cats, because anybody is imagining some big Norwegian wood forest cats for the Vikings. And the funny thing is that cats in the Viking Age looked totally different, more like modern days tabby cats, very small animals because they came from the south, and they do not have anything to do with white cats, actually. And so it was just a fun study to look where we'll get. And
are there any like written sources or archaeological sources that you could go to for this? Because I mean, you hear about people like going back to burials. You hear about people being buried with horses and dogs, but cats not very common, I think. Or is it?
They are. They are absolutely common.
Yeah.
The cat is a very new creature in the north. It comes to Scandinavia in the first centuries AD, and in the Viking Age, it's still a very exotic animal, I would say. And on the one hand, cats still today have this connection with especially female magic and rituals and sorcery and so on, which is very a more or less medieval aspect. In the Viking Age, we have cats both in male and female burials, in children's burials, and one of these guys with his filed teeth from Birka has remains of a cat in his grave. Might have been some fur trimming, I don't know. Yeah. But anyway, this was the reason why I entitled the stuff The Warrior and the Cat. And you can't beat this combination of Vikings and cats. It's just great.
I think it's awesome. So you did the reevaluation. What's your theory about that? Like what role did they play in Viking Age society then, or were they just pets, or did they have But I mean, obviously in the mythology we know that Freya's chariot is pulled by cats.
Yeah, which is nonsense.
I assume, but I mean, that's what the mythology says, which is written down like a long time after the Viking Age. But why would you say it's nonsense then?
This is a funny thing. I always mention this when speaking about Viking Age and our perception of the Viking Age. Because this idea of a female fertility goddess with a chariot drawn by cats is something that comes from the antique topoi. We have Cybele, for example, in antiquity with exactly the same combination. She has also a chariot drawn by lions, I think. And we have quite a lot of animals as companions to the Old Norse gods mentioned in the Poetic Edda and in the Snorra Edda. And they all have names, except for these two cats.
Oh, really?
And they just appear in one short sentence, and they do not have any names. But if you're looking to the internet, you will find some names, two names, Bygol and Tregol, which sounds quite good, sounds Old Norse. Okay. But these names were actually invented in 1984 by an American novel writer, because she was totally disappointed that especially these two cats do not have any names.
Oh,
and
of course.
She made them up. Yeah. I think that's quite a nice example about how our perception of the Viking Age works in a way.
Yeah. But so another mythological thing then, it's the chain that finally binds Fenris, which is, among other things, made from the sound of cats' paws on the ground, or whatever. I forget what the exact phrase is, but so cats obviously are in the mythology. Would you say that that's also a later like addition to the mythology, or were they in there from the start?
In many other instances, cats are connected in Old Norse mythology with something evil. They appear to be trolls or giants. So this is something which I would rather say comes from this medieval Christian perspective, where cats are banned because they are connected with witches and evil sorcery and so on. But this idea, as you just mentioned, what is used for this chain, this is something which might relate to the Viking Age, because I guess that the Vikings were fascinated by these abilities of the cat to move silently, of their abilities as a hunter. And I think that is something which this new creature really brought into Viking Age society.
Yeah. So I think we digressed a little bit, but like, what was your theory about there's role then in Viking society? I mean, obviously for a lot of, I mean, I guess the common conception is the cats domesticated themselves, and because they hunted rats and other vermin, and people thought, well, we should keep these animals closer, and started feeding them. But the cats, when they came to Scandinavia, they were already like a sort of a domesticated animal. So what role would they just be like animals to keep rats and stuff under control, or would they have like social status connected to them, or what?
There are two layers. The one is the cat is a very efficient pest control. You can use it to get rid of rats and mouses, and you can see exactly this development, which you just mentioned in, for example, Haithabu to later Schleswig. So as the teeth of the cats developed further on as they get other access to food. But there's also this idea that cats were given to into burials as grave goods, and especially in burials with the higher status. So there is something about them which makes them very exotic and also very, belonging to a privileged group. And this is something which might be connected to this idea. There comes this new animal, which is totally new in many ways. This silent hunter, perhaps even this affection that cat shows to some people, to other not. So they are their own lords. And this might be exactly the same way we are fascinated with cats today, which might also be valid for the Viking Age. So there are two individual layers or two aspects in this domestication process of the cat.
That's actually interesting, and it kind of brings me just. I remember this headline I read somewhere that it said like, "Scientists, cat can understand us, they just don't care." And it's interesting, like, because when you think about it, cats are so common today, so it's hard to imagine them not having been around all the time. So obviously, they are quite mysterious creatures in a way. So you would assume that the fact that we, like, the earlier societies connected them a lot to magic would be, I mean, kind of understandable, actually.
Yeah. They're hunting at night, they're silently, they are going their own ways, not like a dog who's staying with us the entire time, so we know what the dog is doing. But even today, we do not know what our cats are actually doing. They're somewhere out there.
Yeah, actually, one of our cats has been out for 2 days now.
Okay.
We haven't seen her in 2 days. She's probably out hunting or, just enjoying the weather.
Doing cat stuff.
Yeah, doing cat stuff. So going back into the realm of humans, and we touched upon this briefly, but you also studied slavery, and we were talking about slaves as like a commodity almost that you would take into the grave with you, almost like a silver chain or whatever, right? So slavery in Scandinavia or in Europe in general was like, what do we know about that? Like, how important was it for the economy and for society at large?
Slavery was of highest importance for the economy to get access to the silver from the southeastern or even Arabic world. So the slave trade was very important for the Viking Age. But was the Viking Age society a slave-holding society? So do we have many slaves on farmsteads in Scandinavia? This is a totally different question. This is something where I guess we do not have a common perception from academia. So there are still some questions open.
Yeah, because I think we talked to Charlotte Hedenstjärn about this as well. We talked about the fact that, like, when Vikings were out raiding, they would catch slaves or imprison slaves or take slaves, but would they bring them home? And I think what she said, if I remember correctly, was that it's a really long journey. It's a perilous, it's a very dangerous journey, and rations on board were scarce. So would you sacrifice that to keep a slave alive for that journey, or would you try to sell them? So in that sense, we have slaves here in Scandinavia. But I don't know. Would you say that there's, is that one of the reasons why we are thinking that slaves were not that common in Scandinavia in general, or are there other aspects to that?
I think this is an important aspect, which Charlotte brings up. How do you get this commodity back home? But the question is also what to do with them in Scandinavia. You have a long winter where you can't do anything. You do not have to feed the animals. You are not doing any agriculture. So every slave is another mouth to be fed. And you must afford this. So I guess that slaves might have been present on some of these larger estates. The king had his slaves, of course. Larger farmers might have had some slaves. We know from Eric the Red that he's had this German slave called Tyrkir, which was a teacher to his son, Leif Erikson. But I guess that on most farmsteads there were no slaves at all.
Yeah. So slave trades are like, what are some of the misconceptions then, like in general, about slave trading in like Northern Europe and Scandinavia, would you say?
That's an interesting question. I gather quite a lot. I guess it's the idea that hundreds and thousands of individuals were captured and sold in the markets in the East. And perhaps even the way how the Vikings might have dealt with their slaves. We always have this idea, this perception of a slave being an absolute, being an object. Just as in antiquity, you can do everything you want with this slave. But in another aspect, this slave is a commodity. So if you're treating him well, you get some silver for it. If you're treating it not as good, you're losing money.
Yeah. So that's very interesting, because also you read in, like, I think the sagas and also that slaves sometimes are freed, but how would you become free as a slave then? And would you stay in that society where you were a slave? Like maybe that was a weird question.
But I understand the question. Yes.
Yeah.
Should I answer on it?
Yeah, do. Go ahead.
Okay. You have the possibility to get free as a slave. You can collect some money. Perhaps you're doing some craft work in the evening, and you're selling this stuff on the market if you're allowed by your owner. And if you get enough money, enough silver, you can buy yourself free. But you can also be set free by your owner for some deeds or whatever. And we know of at least one Norwegian king who was a slave for a time of his life because he was just in an unfortunate situation. His ship was captured by other Vikings, he was enslaved, and later on he was freed again. But we also read in the Old Norse saga literature that once you have been a slave, you will never be a full member of the society. You will always remain the one who has been a slave once. So this is a bad marker on you.
Yeah. So, because I think I heard somewhere that it could take like generations, like for that mark. Like even your children would be, like even if they were never slaves themselves, they would still have that marker on them, and even your grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird society in a way. Well, so you studied all these like very fascinating things, but what is there any other like stuff that you study about Vikings that you find particularly like fascinating and interesting? Is there anything that you go like, this is one of the things I found out working with this, and it's absolutely mind-blowing, and most people don't even know about it, or just for the way, like, is there anything that just blows your mind about Vikings? That
I think it's a lot. This anti-culture, this entire society and this age is totally fascinating because it contradicts the perceptions of what people think the Viking Age was, or the Vikings were, at least in Germany, a lot. And in my opinion, most fascinating aspect is this contact with all these different cultures all around the world. So the Viking Age is nothing that happens only in Scandinavia, or that Vikings come from Scandinavia and they're happening to the south. but the Vikings had a world which reaches from the Canadian shore in the west to the entire North Atlantic, to the Arab world, to Central Asia. And they had peaceful contacts, at least, trading contacts with all these cultures. And how did they do this? Was there some Viking who was able to speak Arabic or Latin or whatever? And this is something which most people do not really know about. And this is, we can learn a lot of that from them. And this is, I guess, the most fascinating aspect about the Viking Age.
Yeah. And as you say, like, just the fact that they're willing to travel in these dinghies across the oceans, it's just amazing. Like what drives you to do that? Because obviously it's a dangerous journey to, as you say, to go to the northern shore. Even if you go, like the northern way where you have some land at least in sight, but like it's still very dangerous. Like, why would you get on a journey like that? It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. Just look on the settlement on Greenland. It's the best PR gag in world history. You have this guy, Eric the Red, who has been thrown out from Norway, and then he's going to Iceland, and he's thrown out of Iceland because of some of his bad deeds again. And he's finding Greenland, and he returns 4 years later, and he says, "Hey, come on, guys, I found a Greenland. Come with me." And I'm not sure about the number, but several hundred individuals follow him to this unknown. And it's just totally amazing. And we have this short passage. It's in one of the Vinland sagas. 24 ships are shipping from Iceland, but only 14 arrived. So I guess a loss of 1/3 is quite okay for a Viking journey.
It's acceptable losses, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone is always left behind.
You can make an omelet without breaking some eggs. Oh man, that's terrible. I'm sorry about that. So yeah. So if you could time travel, like go back to the Viking Age, like is there any one thing that you would like to see or experience? Like what would be like the one thing that really, like, this would be like my thing?
I guess everyone would expect that I would just say Haithabu. Of course, I would like to see what this place actually looked in the 10th century. But I guess the most fascinating aspect would be to be part of a trading party on the Russian shores and go down to Miklagard. And
Okay.
imagine you're coming from a small settlement, you're known to a couple of houses in your farmstead, and then you're coming to this enormous Miklagard,
Yeah.
this large town, and
Yeah.
all this atmosphere, the smells, and it must just have been amazing.
The Vikings even tried to invade Miklagard, I know.
Yeah.
But failed miserably, of course. It was like, even compared to Paris, Paris was just, it was a hick town somewhere up in the northwest compared to Miklagard. But yeah, it's I can imagine that being like just to see the world in that way, and the stories you can bring home. I mean, you must imagine that if you come back from that and you try to explain what you've seen, people are not going to believe you, obviously. But like, how do you think that would be for like a Viking Age person? Like I saw this fucking awesome thing,
I'm not sure if you would be able to return to your normal life, be a farmer on some farmstead somewhere in the middle of Sweden. Anyway, there's this nice passage about a guy called Bortli in Laxdæla saga, and he returns from Miklagard, and he is after that only called Skarpmaður Mikil. So a very fashionable man, because he's just wearing silk and all this stuff, and I think it's totally misfitting in the middle of Iceland, where all these farmers are just dressed in brown wool, and you have this guy like a peacock running around the thing. I think it's some kind of culture shock.
Probably, yeah. So, just to round things off then, would you have wanted to live during the Viking Age?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
First of all, I'm a person from the 21st century. I like my shower and I like my safety. But yeah, of course, I would like to have a small view into the Viking Age. Perhaps to realize which mistakes we as archaeologists already have done. But I guess the life in the Viking Age was not as good as we would like to imagine today. So we have a very romanticized view on all this. So I'm quite happy being a man of the 21st century and sitting here together with you in safety and speaking about the Viking Age and how we imagine the Viking Age and especially what we made out of it today. Because it's not a period somehow lost or forgotten or gone. It's still alive in many ways. And this is, I think, as much as fascinated as the Viking Age in the 10th or 11th century.
Yeah. So what do you think about the whole thing of the way that the culture, the Viking culture is blooming now, like across the world? I mean, through TV series and movies and also music like Vardruna and bands like that who are really bringing the Viking Age to a broader audience around the globe. Like, what's your take on that then?
I think that the Viking Age is something which we need at the moment in our time. And it's very fascinating to look upon how the Viking Age is recreated. Someone spoke of the 21st century Viking Age because it has nothing to do or has almost nothing to do with the real Viking Age, but it's a Viking Age which we would like to have today. How the Vikings should have looked, all these cool guys with undercuts and tattoos and dressed in black leather. It's of course not the authentic Viking way, but it's the Viking way which fits with the needs of a society today. So we have this, let's say, very domesticated world where, we're not supposed to kill anyone any longer. And then we have this fascinated culture, this fascinated time where you have the possibility to get into the adventure, to sail into the unknown, to experience a very authentic, or at least what you believe to be authentic lifestyle. And this is something which helps people today, something where you can escape to. So I think that is all this blooming Viking Age enthusiasm is, of course, good for us as archaeologists, good for all these people who worked with it, but it's something that we as society need as a therapeutic tool, perhaps, for us today.
Yeah. I've had this thought in my head that the Vikings are almost the chivalric knights of the 21st century.
But much cooler.
Yeah, but you know how the knights were like, they looked upon as the people with codes and honor and stuff like that. And the Vikings are that, but more human, not portrayed. They're portrayed as like, we have this honor of, you speak the truth and you're a friend of your friend and you're an enemy of the enemy of your friend and all that stuff. So I think in a turbulent world that we live in, maybe that way of viewing the world is helpful, as you said, like a therapeutic tool. Would you agree that the whole sense of the Viking mentality that we get from the sagas and the mythology is something that kind of appeals to people today in general? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a very volatile world, so everything's changing very fast with all this globalization. And I think that many people are feeling that they are losing their hold in society. So they need some norms and rules to stick to, which gives them security. And of course, this might be these, let's say, archaic norms such as loyalty, honor, all this stuff you just mentioned. I guess this is important.
Yeah. Because, I mean, I remember when I first read the Edda, Haithabu. I mean, for me, that was more like a philosophy. It felt more like a philosophy that appealed to my way of thinking in general. And I was thinking that maybe it appeals to me as a Scandinavian because I grew up here. But when you talk to people all around the world who reads this and go like, yeah, this is a really good outlook, like how to treat people, how to behave in life. And you go, yeah, but it's like, you're just leaving out all this violence. But that's also what I got hung up on, these values and stuff. And I think it's a very fascinating thing. So why do you think that people all around the globe, what do you think that people around the globe can relate to this? Because I mean, it's a mythology from a very small corner of the earth, really.
Yeah, but it's especially all these roots and values and norms. They are as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Be a good guy, so everything is fine. You do not need violence at all. You do not need all these rules and laws we have today. It's just the quintessence of living together in a society. If you're hurting me, I will hurt you. So damage done. Everything is fine. And I think this is, maybe a human society in a nutshell.
Be a good guy. I think that's a great way to end this podcast.
Or be a strong guy. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, but be a good guy, be a strong guy, be fair. That's a great way to end. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the Grimfrost Longhouse. It was great talking to you.
Thanks for being invited. It was an absolutely pleasure and an honor.
And I hope I'll see you in Haithabu soon.
You have to.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that bell button.